infrastructure, bricks and mortar. I mean, last year Rugby Australia was paying $11 million a year to lease their fancy Moore Park headquarters.
Whoa, that can't be right. On the 10th of March 2021, The Australian launched The Breakdown, a podcast hosted by Jessica Halloran. The 6-part series was promoted as an exposé of all that was wrong with Australian rugby. With Foxtel losing the broadcast rights to Stan at the end of 2020, it's not overly surprising that News Corp, owner of The Australian and Foxtel, weren't happy, and this is evident in their coverage of rugby since. With that in mind, The Breakdown does raise some interesting points. However, while some of what is raised is subjective in nature, Jessica Halloran uses the fact that Rugby Australia haven't invested in bricks and mortar, and as such have to pay $11 million a year in leasing their headquarters to bolster her argument that Rugby Australia have been poor in their decision making. Which, to be fair, might be worth consideration, if only it were true. However, it is demonstrably false. As someone who has spent a reasonable amount of time reviewing RA's finances, her claim didn't make sense. As an aside, in 2021, I published an overview of Rugby Australian finances over the last 40 years with my colleagues Stephen Frawley, Hunter Fujak, and Lewis Wales. You can find a link in the description. To the first part of her claim that Rugby Australia have not invested in bricks and mortar, you only have to go back to Rugby Australia's 2017 financial report to see, clear as day, a substantial increase in property, plant and equipment, which would primarily represent their investment in the Australian Rugby Development Centre at Moore Park. They even specifically mention this in the notes. To the second part of a claim that Rugby Australia pay $11 million a year in rent, I found this genuinely puzzling as to where this figure came from. Looking at their P&L, there is nothing there which would indicate this. The only two line items more than $10 million are team and player related costs, nothing to do with leasing their Moore Park headquarters. So where did she get this figure from? Being the good accountant I am, I went out and did some sleuthing. The best I can surmise is that she used the $11.386 million operating lease commitments figure in Note 1T, lease accounting. Whilst I can't be certain, there are a few other places referencing leases in their financial report. If this is the figure she is using in her argument, it's not saying what she says it is. That $11.386 million figure is not an annual rent payment for their headquarters. It's not even an annual lease payment for all the things Rugby Australia lease. Rather, it is a total future payments of Rugby Australia's leases at that time. As these are future payments, they've then discounted these cash flows to give a present value, which is $5.386 million. Most importantly, neither the $11.386 million or the $5.386 million represent an annual expense figure. The reason Rugby Australia is even including this $5.386 million in their balance sheet is due to their adoption in 2019 of AASB 16 leases, a new leasing standard issued by the Australian Accounting Standards Board, based on IFRS 16 issued by the International Accounting Standards Board. As much as I'd love to get into a long history of the development of that standard, the impact was that whereas before entities didn't have to recognize all these future lease payments in their balance sheet, they now do. They also have to show the related asset. So in Rugby Australia's case, we see lease liabilities increase by $5.23 million over the year to represent this change. We also see an accompanying asset of $5.8 million being added to intangible assets to represent the leased assets. This still leaves a question as to why Jessica Halloran and her team got this so wrong in the podcast. Was it an innocent mistake? Or was it helped to fit a narrative? I don't know. And given I do have my own bias here, I'll leave it to you to judge. But what I can say is that accounting matters. In the same way that there is an expectation that boards of directors understand accounting, I think there should be an expectation that if journalists write about financial matters, they should have a reasonable understanding of accounting as well. But what do you think? After what has been a quiet few years, thanks COVID, I'm back to making content. If you'd like to support the channel, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video and also happy to get suggestions on ideas for future videos. Cheers.